Oh gosh, hello, hello, hello. So today we are going to have, usually I say that we're going to have an easy little day. Today we're not going to have an easy little day. We have a ton of things to do, but we're going to have a really lovely day, I hope. So are we on week 4 of the boot camp, I believe? I'd have to double check. It feels in my heart like week 4 or 5. It's been a very long time and it will be a very long time to come. Even though working with all of y'all, it feels effortless. And the whole time I've been making silly promises like, hey, we can't do this yet, but with CSS we can. Oh, soon, CSS. Oh, so today, blah, 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 blah. You can't hear me drumming on the table. Today is the day. We're going to do some CSS today. But in order to do some CSS, we're going to do a heck ton of theory first. So boop, boop, boop. Let me get up to the right place in my notes first. There we are. I'm a professional, y'all can tell. We are going to talk through some big chunks of theory. And I would really, really appreciate if y'all could just lovingly yell at me as we go about any questions you've got, any sort of comments, because we're going to talk about a bunch of theory things pretty quickly. And then we're going to come back to them and think about them later. So these are just big concepts. You might want to sketch some of these out in your notes. You want to think about them, but we're going to come back to them. So I've been promising you, because I make a bunch of big promises, huh? We're going to do CSS. CSS is going to be great. Today, time for CSS. What is CSS? CSS is cascading style sheets. Okay. Before we get started, I want to go back in time a little bit. Yeah. So one thing that's true about HTML that we don't really start to realize until we start working with CSS is what I like to call my unified theory of rectangles. Every single piece of content, every single element in HTML is a conceptual rectangle. Yeah. And CSS, these cascading style sheets, are ways we can style all of these rectangles that are chuck, 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 chuck all over the page. These rectangles will make so much more sense in a second. Yeah. So with CSS, we write the rules that our HTML files have applied to them. So browsers take a look at your HTML and say, hey, I know what rectangles you want where. I know about the content you want on this page, and I know about the structure. That's what HTML does. And if you have a CSS file with appropriately written CSS, the browser will say, oh, hold on. You've also got these style rules. So I know how you want this HTML page to be styled. Our fabulous technical expert has added a really common analogy to say, hey, if your web page is a house, if your HTML file is a house, here, the HTML is the foundation and the structure. CSS is the paint and the decorations. Pretty chill, huh? To apply these styles to the HTML elements, we select them using CSS. So when we write our CSS, we're going to say, hey, that element right there, and there's a couple of different ways we could say that element right there, and we'll talk about some. I want these styles to go with this element right here. So you're writing really detailed instructions. CSS can also be used to create responsive designs. And remember, responsive means making web pages and web experiences that work different on different screen sizes. So cascading is going to be really interesting. It's going to be difficult at first, but this cascading part of CSS is going to get us a bunch of times. And we're going to learn more and more about how it cascades. If you're anything like me, we're going to learn through pain, like soft, little, tiny, low stakes computer pain. So the styles we set are cascading, which means they can be inherited by children or can be overwritten if we're really specific. We'll learn about this, I promise. It sounds weird. It is weird. We'll be weird together. This is a spoiler for one of our later theory ones. We can write and keep our CSS in a separate file. So the same way we'd have an HTML file for different web pages on our site, we'd have usually one CSS file for all of our styles. And later on, we'll learn a couple different ways we could put our CSS. But as a spoiler, ideally, you're almost always going to want them in a separate file. Okay, so Hey Jess, we've talked about what CSS is really generally. How do I write it? What does it look like? When we declare the styles we want applied to our HTML elements, we write those out using rules. And I find this really easy to remember because we are setting the rules of style. And as you can tell by me wearing a grubby programming shirt, I am not very good at the rules of style, but it's an easy way to remember that it is CSS rule. So the two parts of the rule are the selector, and the selector is where we're announcing what HTML element we're doing. We're saying, hey, I want to tell you what HTML element or elements these styles are applied to. And then the declaration block. So then you're saying, hey, I've already told you what HTML elements this is going to apply to. Here are the style rule or a bunch of style rules that'll apply to it. All of those are going to have a property and a value, and that won't make any sense yet, and we'll get there. Some of the basic selectors are type selectors, class selectors, and ID selectors. So type selectors, well, let's look at this. So here, we've got a really good example of a type selector. Can anybody tell me so if I'm using a type selector, what kinds of things am I going to be setting styles for? Here we've got an example of a button. And if I say, so here we've already learned about the selector, the declaration block, the property, and the value. Yeah, let's look at this. So here's where we're saying these are which HTML elements. And Pramba's absolutely right here saying, hey, what we're talking about when we're using a type selector is the HTML elements. If I have 6 buttons on my page, how many of those buttons are going to have their background color turned purple if I use a type selector, do you think? And if one of y'all can tell me this is going to give us a really good clue about what the type selector is doing. So here, got the type selector, it's a button. Say, hey, when you see a button, Pramba, thank you so much, my lovely, all of those. So when we use a type selector to set some CSS rules, what we're saying is every single time you see a button, unless I've set a more specific rule using a class or ID later in my CSS, but that's a spoiler, we won't do that yet. So every single time you see a button, take the background color of that and turn it purple. And Yulito makes a good point. Be like, look, we could have just called these element selectors, but we didn't, and we didn't. Every day is suffering, and every day is new indignity, and yet everything's going to be okay. So here, this feels pretty straightforward. We're saying, when you see a button, the background color, the property, background color, I want you to set that to the value of purple. And you might be super excited. You're saying, great, I can just use English keywords for colors. Oh, I'm so excited because there's a bunch of different ways to set colors, and a bunch of them are really cursed. A lot of them are really hard and fun. So the property names are followed with a colon. And then when you're done with a declaration, ends in a semicolon. Okay. And you'll probably forget this sometimes. I forget this sometimes. It's not a problem. ID selectors, and we did IDs before. Remember that each ID should only be used for one element. It's like a name tag for that element. So if we're setting a CSS rule for an element by ID, I think this means that we only want it to be just that one specific element, only for that special element. Like, hey, this is, I'm trying to think of an element on a page you might want to make look really different. And there's nothing singing to my soul right now. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and say, so here we've got the ID of title. So the ID has this hash sign. And a class selector has a dot. We haven't talked about classes at all yet, so I'm really excited. So type selector, every single time you see a button, just apply it to all of those types of elements. Those IDs, we've learned a little bit about IDs and linking. Those IDs are like a name tag for one unique element. But classes are great. Classes are really, really wonderful in CSS when you want to take a bunch of different HTML elements and apply the same rules. If you say, hey, do you know what? I want my fig captions and I want my tables and I want my heading 3s all to have this one specific font. I want to set styles just for them. You can give them all the same class on your HTML. And that's like putting them all in a club. So like your classes for CSS are putting all of your HTML elements that have been given that class, membership to the same club, and the CSS rules you're applying to them are sort of the club rules that you're applying for that class. I see a really good question. So Mel's asking, hey, can you prevent a button for taking on styles? Maybe you want all but one button to have the same style. And cool. So there's a couple different ways you could do this. This is a really good question. So say, hey, what if I'm using the type selector and I want all of my buttons to be purple, except for one of them. I want it to be bright blue because that one's special. That one's important. Yeah. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. So the first thing you could do is you could set a class for all of the other buttons, and these could say purple buttons or most buttons, and say turn those blue. Or if you wanted to say turn all of the buttons blue, turn all of the buttons purple, except for this one, you could have a type selector saying, hey, turn all of the buttons purple, just like we've seen. But then under it, because CSS is cascading, if you write a rule for the button ID, oh, sorry, it's just my cat. If you set a rule and you say, hey, this button I want to be blue, I've given it the ID of blue button, and I've added the blue button should be blue. If you write that further down in your CSS sheet, as it is read down and applied, it'll go ahead and change that, probably before your users can see it, to blue. There's a couple different ways to do it. So almost always, CSS is used for stuff that's visually really important. Oh gosh. One thing that CSS can be really useful for is the meta viewport element. So this is an HTML element. I know we're going from CSS to HTML to CSS. And meta here, what it's doing, let's look at this. So meta, we're back in our HTML. We can tell because we've got our angle brackets. The name is viewport, okay. And we're really almost always gonna write it exactly like this. What we're doing here is we're setting our, oh gosh. We're setting the size of our content to work responsively. I'm so sorry. So we're back in our HTML file. Remember, these meta elements go in our head. And this is a viewport. This seems weird. Here we're saying the content width is always going to be as wide as the device. It's okay. And then we're also going to say the initial scale is always going to be 1.0. So here, if you have a reason that you would want this different, you'll probably know about it. Generally speaking, you can copy and paste this in. So here, hey, I want a meta element. It's a viewport element. And I want to make sure that my content is taking up as much of the window's width as possible. But then when it's scaling vertically, it means that it's not getting stretched out weird. Another stunning question from Mel is like, hey, is it good practice when we're writing our CSS file? Is it good practice to order our CSS file in a specific way? For example, type selectors at the top and classes in the middle and IDs at the bottom. I'm so sorry that some folks do love to do this. Some folks love to go from very, very general to more specific. Some folks like to go grouped conceptually based on what's on the page. With CSS, it's really about what works best for you. And much more importantly, what works best for the team you're working with and the community you're working with. Stuff can get messy really fast. So having sort of an idea in your heart of how you want to approach this can be really useful. So, hey, I'm going to start more broad and go more specific can be a really good way to approach this. Oh, Sunny, that's a really good question. Oh, I'm actually going to ask Edit to double check on me. I've got a pretty opinionated idea on this, but I'm going to ask her to check just to make sure I don't seem too silly. I'm 99% sure. It's all lowercase, right? So here we've talked through this with the device width. The browser is going to set the width of the page to match the screen width. And this means if your user has a window that they're making wider and smaller, that the initial scale 1.0 is going to keep the zoom the same. It's going to keep the stuff on your page from getting weird and stretched. Since this element allows us to control the zooming, we should avoid using user scalable equals no. Yeah. The cool thing is we have not specifically learned how to do user scalable equals no and what that means. So we'll just not do it. So by default, and we've seen this a couple times already, HTML has some built-in styling rules, and these built-in browser styles are called user agent styles that provide some formatting and styles to HTML elements. And y'all know some of these because y'all have heard me like, do not use headings just for styling. Do not use headings just for styling. Do not use headings just for styling or I'll cry, which gives us a really good sign that headings have default styling built in. By default, the H1 element is usually rendered bolder and bigger than regular text, and the boldest and biggest of all the heading elements, and then gets smaller. The HR element, which we talked about briefly, but is not used as often anymore, just creates visually a simple line. The block quote element, which we talked about last week, a week and a half ago, applies indentation to set that apart from the text. And anchor elements by default, links on the web are almost always, unless somebody's specified that they want to be a different way, links on the web are blue text and underlined. And list elements. By default, browsers will usually try to take items on an unordered list or ordered list and add bullet points or numbers and indent them. And you might be saying, Jess, okay, but what if I don't like that default? What if I want to override that default? Yeah, we can do it with CSS. If you've got default rules built in, we can go ahead and set explicit rules that override them. Cool. Here, we've got that spoiler we were talking about earlier. So with CSS, you can put your CSS code in a couple of different places. We can put our, So CSS, we can put it inline, we can put it internal, or we can have it external. Yeah. We can already kind of guess about where we'd like to see this. Our inline CSS is written inside our HTML element using the style attribute. Okay, so this is the way we used to do things before CSS kind of was much of a thing. So here we're saying our paragraph, and here we're saying the style equals color green. What do you think would happen here? What would this code do in our HTML file? So here, oh, and this is actually a good point. When you do this, this will override other styles that were set for the element. So sometimes this is something we do out of desperation. So we had a really good question earlier to say, hey, what if I want all of my buttons purple, except I want one of them to be blue? You might want to override it with inline CSS if you've just gotten to the point where you're real tired. John, oof, I caught an absolute stray off of this one. So is that old and archaic? It is how I would have changed the color of text when I made my first websites. So maybe, yeah. Sorry. So internal CSS, this is something we would set in our head element. And we put our style tags here and opening close, and then we sort of write CSS in there. It's not a wrong way to do it, but conceptually it gets real messy and it's just a lot to look at in one file. And if you're using the same CSS on your homepage as on your contact page, there's really one way that we're going to do this. It's going to make our lives a lot easier. External CSS, yes. When possible, going ahead and saying, hey, we're going to write our HTML, but and we're going to write our CSS separately in a styles.css file. But what we got to be really careful is your HTML does not know about those style rules until you linked them using a link rel equals style sheet, and then a ref, like throwing that link to the styles.css. When we first learned about links, this was so stressful because we didn't, what is a style sheet? What's it going to do? Why do I need it? Finally, we're catching up with ourselves and getting out of our way. So, do you know what? I feel like I get to apologize to all of you quite often. And at the same time, I also don't apologize enough. I am very sorry that I'm always a little bit excited about some things that are kind of cursed. Measurements, width and height. So there are lots of different types of measurements in CSS. And this can be really stressful when we first get started. And I'm sorry. I absolutely promise if you keep writing CSS, it'll just start to feel normal. And the part that doesn't feel normal, looking it up and, hey, I forgot, is this a, and the big things we're going to talk about in CSS units are relative and absolute units, just to spoiler the stuff that's going to stress us out later. But when we talk about the width and the height properties, these are going to control really the size of elements. They could be pixels, px, which are absolute. They could be percentages. This could be the percentage of the parent element. Or they could be viewport units. So this could be a percentage of your user's viewport, what they're looking at the website in. When it's not specified, these are just going to be set to automatic. So it's just going to, if you don't say what size an element should be, your browser will decide for you based on what the element is and the parent element. And we'll learn more about display type in just a second. The minimum width and the minimum height say, please, browser, because like all CSS is sort of a polite entreaty to the browser. Browser, I'm begging you, please, when you're displaying this element, don't make it any smaller than this or any shorter than this. Similarly, if the minimum width and minimum height are larger than width and height, they'll override those values. So if the width and height are set to 50 pixels and the div element has 100 pixels width and height by mid width and mid height, it's going to go with min width and min height, just because those sort of win in the boxing match. Really similarly, max width, max height, exact same thing. Except instead of please don't make them any smaller than this, please don't make them any bigger than this. And this includes the override styles. I know we're going super, super fast, and that's because someone who planned this lesson, it was me, was terrible and gave y'all so much reading. This is all going to feel way too fast, and I hope that this is going to feel easier and easier as we start to write some. So combiners, great. This is, oh gosh, do you know what? This is a good point. Say, hey, do you know what? We could tile an image in a background too with background repeat. Oof. I just got a strong nostalgia for 1997. I definitely had a bunch of background image, tiled image websites, and they had like a stone effect that I had applied with. Do you know? I believe it might have been MS Paint. So with CSS combiners, so we could just say, hey, I want to select all of, I want to set a rule for all of my buttons, or I want to set everything with this class or this ID. But we can also do some fancy things with CSS combiners. The descendant combiner is, and this always gets me, it's so easy to miss this. The descendant combiner, you specify this using a space, just a space, it's a space. Means that you're going to look for this element, the first element is going to be the parent of the second element. That's going to be really, really hard. Let's look at this. So here, oh gosh, do you know what? You can tell these aren't my notes because they're really well written. Here, we've helpfully got our style sheet linked here because we need to have our style sheet linked in our HTML. And here, we've got a figure. The figure element has inside of it the children of this figure element. There's two children of this figure element are an image and a fig caption. So the two children of the fig element. So here we've said that, hi browser, because this browser is my friend, hi browser, I want to set this rule. I want to set the border property to be 4 pixels, solid red, for the image element, any image element on my page, any image element that is the child of a figure element. So within our code here, there's just one. So that we would get a solid red 4-pixel border around this image. Gosh, we've got somebody asking if they will be able to follow along with this course as well as another CSS course. I'm so sorry that it depends on your schedule and the other course and yeah, I'm so sorry that that might be a little bit outside of my ability to predict. You're welcome to hang out, and if it is too busy for you, you can drop out or you can come back later. All of the videos are always available online. So the child combiner is represented by this angle bracket. And you might be like, Jess, that angle bracket, I use that for HTML. Why is that showing up in CSS? Like, it's cool. It's cool. We just borrowed a character. It's going to be okay. So the child combiner is going to help us select elements that are the direct children of the specified parent element. So here, we've got a link to our style sheet again. We're safe. We've got a div with the class of container. Okay, I don't love divs, but this div, we've got some extra context, the class is container. We've got some, oh, sorry. My effusive apologies. So here, we've got a div. Inside the div is a paragraph element. Inside the div, under the paragraph element, there's another div with a paragraph element in it, and that closes. And under, so hang on, let's talk this through. We got a div, right? Yeah, this div is a container. Inside this div, it's got some children. It's got a paragraph element. Then it's got 2 divs inside it. and those divs have paragraph elements inside them. So with our CSS, we're going to say, I want to set a rule for the paragraph elements, but only the ones that are a direct container of the child. So based on this, we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 paragraph elements. Can somebody who's not me or Edda tell me which one of these, which text would be blue? So which of these is the direct child? Which paragraph element is the direct child of the container? First, second, or third? And it takes a minute with the lag. Oh, heck, it's in the notes. Sorry. I know, yeah, y'all got it. So this would be the first one where it says first would show up in bright blue. Yeah, because it is the direct child of the element with the class container. And if you're like, oh no, don't worry. These are weird. We're just going to play with them until they feel less weird. The same way that we have parents and children, we can have next siblings. And the next sibling is marked with the plus. I almost never use this, but when I use it, it is such a good shortcut. So that means, hey, go ahead and select the element that immediately follows a sibling. Here we've got, okay, this feels familiar. We saw this before. So we've got our link to our style sheet, because we always have our link to our style sheet, just keep us safe. Here we've got our figure, and inside our figure, we've got an image and a big caption. Everything's fine so far. Let's see what our style rules are going to be. Oh, so here, the image plus fig caption is going to have a border set to 4 pixels that are solid black. So here, we're saying, look at the image element, and then look at the fig caption that is the next sibling. So here, we're going to see I think we're going to, let me check. Yeah. So we're going to see a 4-pixel solid black border around the text. Nice. The subsequent sibling combinator, using the tilde, says, hey, select the elements that immediately follow a specified sibling element. So here we've got a div with a class container, the subheading, first, sec. Okay, very, very easy to understand code. Here I'm saying, hey, I'd like for the color green to be applied to the paragraph element that is the next element after the H2. Y'all, which of these are going to be green? And I think y'all will know. So all of them. These are all paragraph elements that immediately follow the H2. Every one of these is going to turn out green. And if these feel weird, copy and paste these over and just experiment with these. These are all weird. And right now, they're all weird in ways that can't hurt us. Stunning. I have also heard folks ask about this a whole bunch. So I've told you that every single HTML element is a rectangle, even the ones that look round. We'll get there. I promise this will make more and more sense over time. But if you get to the end of all 10 weeks and you do not believe in my unified theory of rectangles, you know what, that's also fine. But there's 2 types. There's many types of rectangles, but there's 2 types of space HTML elements can take up as rectangles. Either they're inline, which means those HTML element blocks are going to sit. You can stack them in a row, you can stack them in lines, and they're just going to take up as much space as they need to be that element. Whereas block level elements, by default, are going to take up as much space. They're going to take the full width of any containing element. They always start on a new line, and they always push everybody else to the next line. Block level elements by default have the CSS property display block. set to default. And this is a really, really good hint on what if you have an inline element and you want to let it push out and let it take up space. You would set its display property to inline. Everybody's already yelling and I love it. Okay, so Mel, I'm so sorry. This is a really good question. Mel saying like, hey, is the reason that all of these just is the reason you're saying all of these HTML elements are rectangles because the width and the height that determines the where the next element starts, not the shape necessarily? Yes and no. I'm kind of saying that I'm kind of saying this in a philosophical way. So when we start, and one thing I really like to do is use CSS to color, like background color or add color to different HTML elements and see the way they sort of line up on a page. Because when you see a bit of text, that text doesn't always feel like a rectangle until you add a background color and say, oh, that's just sort of a chunk. That paragraph is a chunk of text. That's like a just chunked onto the page. Yeah. So it's more about it's a philosophical rectangle, if that's not weird. And the two different types. Oh, and Mel makes a good point. Do you know what? If you don't want to add colors, adding borders to see the outlines of your philosophical rectangles using CSS is a really good way to do it. So your philosophical HTML rectangles can be inline or they can take up the whole block. And the way I try and remember that is block level elements, they'll take up the whole block. They'll push everybody else down to the next street. Some examples are divs, paragraphs. So even though they're lines of text when they're displayed, the paragraph element itself, boom, is going to bounce everybody else off her block. Ordered and unordered lists, block level. Section elements, block. And inline elements, they're polite. They just want to get in line. They want to make as much space for other folks as possible. They're only going to take as much width as their content needs. Unless you specify something else with CSS. They don't, by default, start on a new line, but you could change that with CSS, I bet. They'll float along with other content. They are so agreeable. They're like, I'll stand here, you stand here. We're just going to stand in order. We'll get along. By default, inline elements have the CSS property display inline. And some examples of these that we've seen is span, that anchor text the anchor tags we've seen, the anchor elements made of anchor tags that we've seen, they boop, sit right in the middle of your paragraph elements, huh? And images. Okay. We were kind of okay so far, which was there's inline elements and there's block elements. And you can change, they have default behavior for some elements, and you can change that by overriding display inline or display block. But now there's also inline block. So just like inline elements, they'll float along other content, but unlike inline elements, you can change the width and height. So if you've got an inline block element, you can go ahead and set that. Oh, what a good question. Can we set a block element to an inline element? Yeah. And do you know what? When we get to doing stuff in the code editor, can I ask y'all to remind me to try that and see how it feels? We absolutely can. Sometimes it'll make a bigger mess than you want it to, but who doesn't love a little mess? Sorry, that's very exciting. I am constantly doomed by having a silly little time with HTML and making a big mess. Okay, margins and padding. Margins and padding are really important for the layout structure. So somebody was asking earlier in earlier classes about, hey, can I use a bunch of BR elements, line break elements to get that space? And I was like, please don't, because we could use margins and we could use padding to get the same visual effect with, not having to write code that doesn't make as much sense anymore. Remember that margins are the space outside your element. So the easiest way to remember this is a margin on a page when you're writing. This is the space around your writing, or here around your paragraph element, or around your image. So this is your elements. When you set margins for your element, It's how much that element will push away from the other elements around it. Yeah. Whereas padding is the space inside an element. And this could be you want the padding to change where the text in a button appears. Um, this gives us space to improve readability and just improve the vibes. I think about setting the padding as the padding is sort of a bubble wrap. You wrap around the inside of your element if we're thinking of it as a box, as a rectangle. You're going to see these all the time. These always go clockwise. The margin property, if you set the margin and then say 10 pixels, by default, it will set 10 pixels on the top. It'll set 10 pixels on the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. But you can set these individually. And when you add different numbers, you would say margin, colon, 1 pixel, comma, 5 pixels, comma, 2 pixels, comma. And this would be saying set the margin on the top to 1 pixel, the margin on the right to 5 pixels, the margin on the bottom to 2 pixels. It's always going to go ahead and go clockwise. Oh, here we go. Here's a really good example. So here is our paragraph element. Oh gosh, thank you, Matthew. Yep, there's a mnemonic for this. The top, right, bottom, left is for trouble or treble if you're a, or remember that we're going around with the clock. So here we're setting a paragraph and the margin, the space out between this paragraph and the other elements is going to be 10 pixels at the top, 5 pixels on the right, 20 pixels on the bottom, and 4 pixels on the left. And y'all might have me mirrored because cameras. We could write it separately like this, setting the margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. But that's a lot of extra writing. Setting it like this would set the top and bottom to 10 and the left and right to 5. We will absolutely forget this, and it will absolutely not hurt us. The padding property, exact same. Padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. Or we could just say padding and set those numbers separately. Here, the padding would be 8 pixels top and bottom and 4 pixels left and right. Everything's stressful, but it can't hurt us. We have been going forever. Let's write a little bit of CSS together, if that's okay. Oh gosh, I did not mean to suggest this has taken forever, as in it's not an absolute joy to be here with y'all. I meant that was a lot of me talking, huh? We are going to do a workshop today, and then because y'all had a heck ton of reading today, I'm going to give you a hint that your solo work after this course is going to just be creative, no reading. So we're going to try and make this. All right, this feels like a lot of CSS for our first CSS. Ooh, okay. So we're in our HTML. So far, everything seems chill, right? Okay, main body. Okay. Here we're going to set the main element. Oh gosh, here I'm going to actually write this right. I see a question about border radius with border shorthand. Could I absolutely thank you, request that? Edda grabs this in the background while I am hopping through the code. And we're not going to go through all of this because I'm mean. So we're going to add, I'm going to actually skip ahead. So here we'd add an H1, but y'all have seen an H1 before. I'm going to skip ahead until we get to the sweet spot. No, we're going to skip ahead. I'm going to skip ahead. Was it 6? Is 6 where I wanted to start? Ha 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 ha. Great. So this is exactly where I wanted to be. Let's talk through really fast what we've got so far. Doctrap HTML, we've got our boilerplate. We've got our HTML element, our big parent of everybody element, our head. And here, we're going to start writing some CSS in the way where I told you I didn't really want you to write your CSS like this. It's not illegal, it's not against the rules. But what we're going to do is I'm going to format my document so that I can see that the style is a child of the head. And I'm going to start by writing my CSS in here. Yeah, there's nothing against the rules, but generally, the same way we've got an HTML file here, we can toggle on and off. We don't want to write that as a separate CSS file, huh? Okay, so here it's reminding us the example code. Here's what your CSS wants to look like. We're going to take our H1. And an H1's a fun one, huh? Because this is a type selector. And technically, a type selector would set these style rules for every single H1 on the page. Why? And usually we'd use a type selector when we want, again, to reuse the same style across every element of the page that's of the same type. Why is that less important for an H1 than almost everyone? What is it about an H1 that's usually special? Why wouldn't we have 5 or 6 or 10 that we're saving time by styling? So I'm going to set a text align property. Ooh, heck. I'm going to set that to center. You have a, oh, do you know what? That was almost imperceivable. I'm going to take this away. Okay, so we get to see a little jump. I'm going to paste my code back in. Oh, and we see by default, as soon as we said, hey, when you, please browser, when you see an H1 on this page, set the text align to center, and it did. Phil's just like, you can't fool me, Jess. You told us to only have one H1 per page. Yes, I did, and thank you very much. We are going to get our instructions back and check our code and keep having a chill time. Haha, this is as much of an ad break as we get. The bootcamp is free code camp is free. But if you do take this course and you get a fancy job and you've got tons of cash and you're having the best time, Free Code Camp, who's not us, we're separate, is a registered charity. So they do take donations. Don't spend money you don't have, but it's a really cool thing if you do have the cash to donate. So our previous step, we used a type selector. Now we're going to use, so we want to center the content of all of our H2 elements and our paragraph elements by adding a new type selector to each one of the existing style elements. What's this trying to say? Do you think it wants us to just add the H2 as well? I mean, it works. I'm not sure if this is asking us to put it like this or to write them as 3 separate style rules. So I'm going to try this, and if it's not, I should not change the exit. Oh, my apologies. Okay, so you didn't want me to do that. That's fine. The nice thing about being wrong is it can't really hurt us. And I wonder, by adding a new type select, by adding a new type select for each one. Okay. It did say this fairly clearly. Gosh, I'm seeing some folks in the chat who are also based in the UK, and y'all who are, I'm based in the UK as well. We have what we would like to consider a heat wave, and what many of you all in other regions would possibly not be very sympathetic for. So what I'm going to do is take a couple more steps and get a little bit comfortable with this, and then I'm personally going to go lie down. So we have, okay, I did this backwards. We have 3 type selectors with the same styling. We can change and have them do different things, or we could do is we could condense them. It's the way I first wrote that. And we can delete these two. Why would we want to write it this way instead of writing 3 of these? Stunning. So now things are changing. I love when things are changing. It's so stressful. Here, oh, heck. Let's get rid of the preview for just a second. We've got too much going on. So what the instructions are telling us is like, hey team, we asked you to write your CSS in these style tags, but now we're going to move these over. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut and paste all of the styles over here. Then we're going to get rid of these. These style elements, the opening closing tags from, do not exist anymore. But so the question how to skip steps on free code camp, you could maybe possibly, you shouldn't, but you can change the number in the URL in the address bar if you needed to look at what's next, hypothetically. So here we need to, so the preview doesn't work yet. And that's weird, huh? Because I've got a CSS file here and I've got the right code in it. But here in the head, what I don't have is a link. I don't have a link between my HTML and my CSS. And we've got styles. And as soon as I link those together, all of my rules start being applied. Is that okay? Let's check our code. Everything is terrible and this can't hurt us. Okay. Oh, do you know what? I jumped the gun and already deleted this, but we can delete it again. There's very little that's as satisfying as deleting code. I'm only going to do a couple more steps with us because I want to make sure that I'm doing less and less of this. Oh gosh, I already did this as well. But I want to make sure, are there any questions anybody else had that I didn't get to? I saw a lot of y'all asking each other's questions, answering each other's questions in the chat. That was really, really useful. So this is each step is its own HTML page in the Workshop Cafe menu folder. Do you mean the way it's, so do you mean that each step in the workshop will have a pre-written HTML page, pre-written HTML index.html file here? Or is this a question about how this is structured in the free code camp project? Like, for all intents and purposes, it is the same index.html file for every single step, but the tutorial environment is adding or taking away a little bit each time. Sorry. Oh yeah. Mel, you're trying to understand the sitemap. Cool. The sitemap is the sitemap for these tutorials are going to be somewhat complex based on their needs. It's a single page app. So yeah, if you're trying to think of these as static pages, I was just about to say going and looking at the code on GitHub can be a good way to do this. But these are being displayed using some fancy stuff that we're not necessarily going to get to in this course. So yes, but it's complicated. Amazing. I'm so sorry that this sounds brutal. I'm not going to do too much of these with y'all. So this is a really, really long section. And of course, I'm excited about everything we're going to learn together. But we did a ton of lecture stuff. And a lot of these, like a lot of the workshop points are really, really well documented. So please do this. Please do this. Y'all are grown. Y'all have been doing this for 4 weeks. I'm going to give you some space to work on that because what I'm excited to do is go and lie down and have some cold water. But I'm also excited to look at what we're doing tomorrow. Gosh, I'm taking it all the way up, all the way up. So please today get through as much, if you haven't already finished, please get through as much of Design a Cafe menu. Please finish that in your own time if you don't mind. But what we're going to do tomorrow, and then tonight or tomorrow before our next session, if you can, try and get through as much of this solo project as you can. This is asking you to design a digital business card. And I bet you $1 you know what I'm going to say, which is please be as creative as possible. Please be weird. I would love to see your weird business cards that feel like y'all. And what we're going to do in class tomorrow is I will go through and I will make one of these for me in real time with no prep, and I will do a bad job and we will all yell and kiss. Is that all right? Cool. You all have been delightful this afternoon or morning or middle of the night, whatever time it is. How about I let all of y'all too have the easiest possible time? We're going to do a lot of work on this business card tomorrow. And as always, if you feel like showing off what you've built, I love, love, love to see examples of what you made, but there's never any obligation. I'm going to let all of y'all go. Everybody someplace warm, stay chilly. Everybody someplace cold, stay warm. And everyone, please have the chillest time you can. Bye, loves.